Imagine being on a crowded airplane, holding a baby who won't stop crying no matter what you do. Every passenger is staring, the pressure is unbearable, and a broken father feels like he's failing once again. But then, out of nowhere, a quiet, timid woman reaches out her hands. In seconds, the impossible happens. The baby falls silent, and when the father looks at her face, he freezes because she looks exactly like his late wife. What happens next will leave you speechless. The hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin as the night stretched on, a dull roar that usually lulled passengers to sleep. But for Ryan Parker, the flight from New York to Chicago felt endless. His son Ethan, just over a year old, had been crying for nearly half an hour straight. His little body squirming in his father's tired arms, Ryan shifted in his seat, trying to balance the weight of the boy against his chest with one hand while stretching the other toward the pacifier that had rolled onto the narrow aisle floor. He leaned forward awkwardly, fingers brushing against the plastic edge, but it slipped further out of reach. A frustrated sigh escaped him. It was the third time he had tried, and the third time he had failed. Around him, the cabin was restless. A businessman in a navy suit tightened his jaw and pulled his headphones over his ears. A young woman 2 rows ahead shot him a sharp glance before burying her face back into her book. Ryan caught every look, every sigh, every subtle shake of the head, and each one pressed heavier against his chest. He gave small, apologetic nods, silently begging for patience. But no one responded. Ethan's cries only grew louder, piercing and desperate. The kind of cries that made Ryan's heart ache because he knew his son was exhausted, overwhelmed and in pain, though he couldn't say why. Ryan's arms trembled as he rocked the child in small, frantic motions. He whispered soothing words, half lullaby, half prayer. "It's okay, buddy. Daddy's here." "You're okay." But the cries didn't stop. His own eyes burned. He hadn't slept properly in days. His face, pale and drawn, carried shadows of months spent juggling work, grief and single fatherhood. He remembered the night Ethan was born, as vividly as if it had happened yesterday. The rush to the hospital, Emily's hand slipping from his grasp, the chaos of nurses shouting, and then, suddenly, silence. When the storm ended, Emily was gone. She never got to hold their son. Ryan never got to say goodbye. From that day on, he had lived with an emptiness that nothing seemed to fill. Every time Ethan cried like this, every time Ryan failed to soothe him, he felt the weight of her absence all over again. On this flight, that weight pressed harder than ever. His attempt at escape, taking a short trip abroad to clear his head, had done nothing. Now with the crying child in his arms and exhaustion written into his bones, Ryan felt trapped. He wanted to break down right there, cry with his son, admit that he didn't know how to do this alone, and then, just as his own tears threatened to fall, he heard a calm voice beside him. "Would you like me to try?" Ryan turned his head slowly. The woman in the window seat was looking at him, her expression steady, her eyes kind. She didn't look annoyed, didn't look impatient. She looked familiar. For a moment, Ryan couldn't breathe. His pulse hammered in his ears. The woman's face, her hazel eyes, the curve of her lips, even the gentle way she blinked, was like looking at Emily again, his late wife. The resemblance was so striking that it felt impossible, like a cruel trick of fate. Ryan stared, shaken to his core, uncertain if his exhaustion had finally tipped him into madness. But then Ethan's wailing pierced the moment, and instinct overcame fear. He gave a small, hesitant nod. The woman reached out with careful hands, and Ryan surrendered his son to her. She held Ethan against her chest, her movements fluid, natural, as though she had known him his whole life. Without saying another word, she began rocking gently, her arms swaying in a slow, soothing rhythm. A soft hum rose from her lips, a tune low enough that only Ethan could hear. Almost immediately the boy's sobs began to falter. His tiny fists loosened, his cries turned to soft whimpers, and then, as if wrapped in magic, he drifted into silence. Within minutes, Ethan was asleep, his cheek nestled against the stranger's shoulder. Ryan's throat tightened. He could only watch, frozen, as the cabin around him settled into quiet once more. His son, his screaming, restless son, was calm, asleep, safe. The woman turned to him after a moment, her voice still soft. "He's okay now." Ryan blinked, struggling to steady his breath. "Yeah," he whispered, though nothing about this felt okay. Inside, his world had shifted, and he couldn't explain why. The airplane cabin had fallen into a fragile quiet, broken only by the steady hum of the engines and the occasional rustle of a passenger shifting in their seat. Ryan Parker sat motionless, as if one wrong movement might undo the miracle he had just witnessed. His son, Ethan, whose cries had shaken the cabin for what felt like an eternity, now slept peacefully in the arms of a stranger. But to Ryan, she wasn't just a stranger. The longer he looked, the more the resemblance unsettled him. The tilt of her head as she glanced down at Ethan, the delicate way her eyelashes brushed against her cheeks, even the rhythm of her breathing. It all mirrored Emily, his wife, the woman he had buried 2 years earlier. He clenched his fists against his knees, trying to ground himself in the reality of the moment. This isn't Emily, it can't be. But logic didn't silence the flood of emotions roaring inside him. He felt dizzy, his heart thundering as if he'd run a marathon, his mouth dry as sandpaper. The woman caught his gaze briefly. Her eyes, warm hazel with a faint green ring around the edges, met his for only a second, but it was enough. Ryan's chest ached. It was too much the same. He dropped his eyes quickly, afraid she might read the storm of grief and confusion etched across his face. Ethan stirred in her arms, letting out a soft sigh, before nestling closer to her chest. The woman instinctively shifted, adjusting her hold with the kind of ease that came only from experience. Her movements were unhurried, precise, as though she had rocked 1,000 children to sleep before this one. Ryan forced himself to speak, though his voice cracked with fatigue. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done." She gave a small smile, the kind that didn't feel practiced, just natural. "It's okay. I work with kids all the time. Babies are just babies. They cry because it's the only way they know how to say they need something." Her tone was calm, confident, like a teacher explaining something to a nervous parent. Her words should have comforted him. But instead, Ryan felt another pang deep in his chest. Emily used to say things like that, reminding him that babies weren't problems to be solved, but little souls learning to be heard. He swallowed hard, staring down at his hands. The woman shifted slightly in her seat. "Careful not to wake Ethan. He's a beautiful boy," she added softly. Ryan nodded, but his throat felt too tight for words. For a while, silence stretched between them, filled only by the muted sound of the plane. Ryan sat rigid, trying to resist the magnetic pull that kept his eyes drifting back to her face. Every feature ignited a memory. Emily laughing in their old kitchen, flour dusting her hair. Emily pressing his hand against her pregnant belly, whispering, "Feel that. He's strong." Emily's pale lips on the hospital bed, the life gone from her before he had a chance to say goodbye. Ryan closed his eyes briefly, fighting the sting that rose in them. He wanted to look away forever, but he couldn't. It was as if the universe had opened a wound he had tried desperately to stitch shut. The woman finally spoke again, her voice gentle but curious. "I'm Isabella Carter. I'm heading back home after a conference in Boston." "What about you?" Ryan hesitated, then forced the words out. "Ryan Parker, Chicago, just heading home." He paused, debating whether to say more. For years, he had avoided conversations with strangers that touched on his personal life, because the truth always carried a shadow. But something about Isabella's steady presence made him want to share, even if only a little. He cleared his throat. "My wife, Ethan's mom, she passed away when he was born." Isabella's expression softened instantly. Her lips pressed together, her eyes flickered with respect and sorrow, but she didn't gasp or flood him with pity like others often did. Instead, she simply nodded. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That must be hard." The simplicity of her response disarmed him. No probing questions, no empty platitudes, just acknowledgement. Ryan felt gratitude stir inside him, a warmth he hadn't expected to feel in the middle of such a heavy moment. "Yeah," he murmured, his voice rough. "It is." Another silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable this time. Ethan's soft breaths filled the space, his small chest rising and falling against Isabella's. Ryan found himself studying the way she cradled him, not just with her arms, but with her entire body, as though protecting him from the world. It was uncanny. Emily had held their newborn nieces the same way at family gatherings, years before Ethan was born. Ryan remembered watching her then, thinking how natural she looked with children, how ready she seemed for motherhood. And now, here was Isabella, a stranger holding his son with that exact same grace. He realized he was staring when she turned to him again. "Are you okay?" she asked. Ryan blinked, startled. He forced a quick nod. "Yeah, just tired." Her gaze lingered for a second, as if she didn't fully believe him, before she returned her attention to Ethan. She hummed softly again, a faint tune that blended with the drone of the engines. The sound was familiar, too familiar, though Ryan couldn't place it. Minutes turned into half an hour. Ryan found himself oddly calm, as if Isabella's presence was casting a spell over both father and son. His shoulders, tense since boarding, began to loosen. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, he allowed himself to simply sit, to breathe, but beneath that calm was an undercurrent of something else, an unease, a question he couldn't shake. Who was she, really? And why did she feel so much like Emily returned to him, in body and spirit? As the captain's voice eventually crackled over the intercom, announcing their descent into Chicago, Ryan felt a pang of dread. Soon the moment would end. Isabella would hand Ethan back. They would go their separate ways, and he wasn't ready for that. Not when it felt like fate had just handed him a piece of his wife back from beyond the grave. When the plane touched down and passengers began gathering their belongings, Isabella carefully shifted Ethan back into Ryan's arms. The baby stirred, blinked up at her, and then smiled. A wide, innocent smile that made Ryan's throat tighten all over again. It was as if Ethan recognized her, as if he knew her from some place beyond memory. "Good luck with him," Isabella said warmly as she picked up her bag. "He's a strong one. You'll both be okay." Ryan opened his mouth, wanting to ask for her number, her email, something, but his courage faltered. The words stuck in his throat. He only managed a weak "thank you." She smiled once more, then turned toward the aisle. Blending into the sea of departing passengers, Ryan sat frozen in his seat, Ethan resting against his chest, watching her disappear. His heart pounded with an urgency he hadn't felt in years, a voice inside him screaming that he couldn't just let her vanish. But his body refused to move. By the time he stepped off the plane and into the terminal, Isabella was gone, and yet her presence clung to him like a shadow, heavy and haunting. He knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. The drive back from O'Hare International Airport felt like an eternity. Chicago's skyline glowed faintly against the early evening sky, but Ryan barely noticed it. He sat behind the wheel of his black SUV, one hand gripping the steering wheel, the other resting gently on Ethan's car seat handle, as though reassuring himself the baby was really there and really asleep. Normally, Ethan woke up the second the car moved, but tonight he slept peacefully, as if Isabella's touch had left a lingering comfort. Ryan's thoughts, however, were anything but peaceful. His mind replayed every second of the flight in agonizing detail. The moment Isabella reached out, the way Ethan's cries melted into silence in her arms, her calm humming that seemed almost familiar, and above all her face, that haunting resemblance. He pulled into the long driveway of his suburban home, a large two-story house tucked away in one of Chicago's quieter neighborhoods. The house was immaculate on the outside, white trim, clean brickwork, a neat yard, but inside it carried the echoes of a life that had fractured 2 years ago. Emily's favorite porch swing creaked gently in the breeze, unused. The flower boxes she once filled with daisies now held nothing but dead stems. Ryan parked the car, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the silence. He glanced at his son through the rearview mirror. Ethan's small face was soft in sleep, his lips parted slightly, his tiny fists curled. Ryan's heart ached with both love and inadequacy. "I can't even keep you calm without help," he thought bitterly. "Your mother would have known what to do. She always did." He carried Ethan inside, his footsteps echoing in the wide, empty foyer. The house was too big for just the two of them, a constant reminder of what was missing. He set Ethan gently into his crib upstairs, watching him stir but not wake. Then, for the first time in hours, Ryan allowed himself to collapse onto the edge of his own bed. But rest didn't come. He sat hunched forward, his hands gripping his knees, staring blankly at the floor. The memory of Isabella's face burned in his mind. It wasn't just a passing resemblance, it was uncanny. The same nose, the same smile, the same softness in the eyes. And yet Isabella wasn't Emily. She was someone else entirely, with her own voice, her own presence. Ryan stood abruptly, as if movement could shake off the unease. He walked to the dresser, where a framed photograph of Emily stood. In it, she was laughing, her hair tumbling around her shoulders, holding a picnic basket on a summer's day. He traced a finger along the glass, whispering, "What would you think of this?" Of her? Of me? His chest tightened until he had to pull away. Downstairs, the silence of the house pressed in on him. He fixed a bottle for Ethan in the kitchen, moving mechanically, his body on autopilot. As the milk warmed, his gaze drifted to the laptop sitting closed on the counter. His stomach knotted. He knew what he wanted to do, even if he wasn't sure he should. Later, when Ethan was finally asleep for the night, Ryan sat in his dimly lit office, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating his weary face. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he finally typed, "Isabella Carter. Boston, Child Development Conference." Dozens of results appeared. Most irrelevant. LinkedIn profiles, articles with the wrong name, conference schedules filled with academic jargon. He refined his search, adding words like early childhood education, Conference 2025, and Chicago connections. Each attempt led to more frustration. Nothing specific, nothing concrete. He rubbed his eyes, leaning back in his chair. "What am I even doing?" He scolded himself. "She's just a woman who helped with Ethan, that's all." But it wasn't all. He couldn't deny the way Ethan had looked at her, as if recognizing her. He couldn't ignore the way his own heart had jolted. The way his grief had twisted into something new, part hope, part fear. His gaze fell on another photo nearby, Ethan's ultrasound. Framed in silver, the word miracle etched along the border. He remembered Emily's words when they got the picture. "He's already ours, Ryan. No matter what happens, he'll always have us." But now, Ethan only had him. And maybe Isabella, if fate meant something by crossing their paths. The hours stretched on. Midnight passed, then 1 a.m. Ryan sifted through social media, conference websites, educational directories. Finally, exhaustion won out. He shut the laptop, sat in the silence of his office, and stared at nothing. When morning came, he was up before the sun. Sleep had been shallow, filled with restless dreams of Emily standing in the airplane aisle, holding Ethan, only for her face to shift into Isabella's. He brewed coffee so strong it burned, sipped it slowly, and tried to convince himself he was imagining everything. But later that afternoon, as he pushed Ethan's stroller through the neighborhood park, a ritual he tried to keep for Ethan's sake, fate intervened again. The park was alive with families. Parents chatted on benches. Children chased one another across the grass. Dogs barked joyfully. Ryan found an empty bench beneath a large oak tree and sat down, watching Ethan giggle at the sight of a golden retriever bounding after a frisbee. He almost felt normal for a moment. Almost. And then, as he bent to pick up Ethan's sippy cup that had rolled to the ground, someone jogged past and brushed his shoulder lightly. The plastic bottle slipped from his hand and hit the dirt. Ryan straightened, annoyance flickering across his face, only to freeze. It was her, Isabella. She stood a few feet away, dressed in running clothes, her dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail, her skin glistening with sweat from the jog. She looked surprised, her earbuds dangling loosely in one hand. But then she smiled, a small, hesitant smile that made Ryan's heart lurch. "Hi," she said, almost shyly. Ryan's mouth went dry. He managed a nod, forcing a word out. "Hey," her eyes flickered toward the stroller. "Is that the same baby? From the flight?" Ryan's lips curved in a faint smile despite himself. "Yeah, that's Ethan." As if on cue, Ethan looked up from his toy, and upon seeing her grinned so wide it made his cheeks dimple. He reached his arms out toward her with a little squeal. Isabella's expression softened instantly. She crouched down beside the stroller, brushing a gentle hand over Ethan's tiny fingers. "Hey, buddy, you remember me, huh?" The sight hit Ryan like a punch to the chest. Ethan's reaction wasn't just recognition, it was joy, trust, the kind he didn't show easily. Ryan stood there, rooted, as Isabella looked up at him. For a moment their eyes locked again, and the unspoken truth hung between them. This wasn't coincidence. Twice now fate had pushed her back into his world, and deep down Ryan knew this was only the beginning. The park smelled faintly of cut grass and cotton candy from a nearby vendor cart, children's laughter ringing out across the playground. For most parents, it was just another weekend scene in suburban Chicago. But for Ryan Parker, standing there beside the stroller, it felt like the universe had tilted once again. Isabella Carter, this mysterious woman who had soothed his son mid-flight, wasn't just a face he couldn't forget. She was here, in his city, not a fleeting shadow on an airplane, but flesh and blood, catching her breath after a jog and smiling down at Ethan like she had known him forever. Ryan's pulse pounded. He tried to ground himself by adjusting Ethan's stroller straps, but his hands trembled. Twice now. Twice fate has put her in front of me. Why? Isabella rose slowly from where she had crouched to greet Ethan. Her cheeks were flushed from running, strands of hair escaping her ponytail, sticking to her damp forehead. She tugged the earbuds loose and wrapped them around her phone. "So," she said lightly, "you live around here?" Ryan's instinct was to tell the truth, but instead a strange fear made him hesitate. He didn't want to sound like he had been looking for her, even though he hadn't. "No," he lied, his voice almost too casual. "Just thought I'd take Ethan out somewhere different today." A change of scenery. She tilted her head, studying him for a moment, as though sensing something unsaid, but she let it go. "I live just a couple blocks over. I come here almost every evening. Running helps me clear my head." Her tone was open, unguarded, and Ryan found himself watching the way her lips shaped each word. Emily used to say almost the same thing about running on the treadmill in their basement. "It's not for my body, it's for my head." The memory clawed at him, but he forced himself back into the present. They sat down on a bench together, Ethan gurgling happily in his stroller, trying to grab at Isabella's shoelaces as though he wanted her full attention. She laughed, a warm, husky laugh that carried across the grass and landed straight in Ryan's chest. "You've got a charmer on your hands," she said, tapping Ethan's little foot. Ryan smiled faintly, though his throat tightened. "Yeah, he's something else." The conversation began hesitantly, like two strangers testing the water. Isabella talked about her work, how she was a child development coordinator at a preschool network, how she had been in Boston for a professional conference on early learning. She spoke with passion, her hands animated, her voice alive whenever she mentioned kids. Ryan mostly listened. He wasn't used to talking much anymore. Since Emily's death, his life had narrowed into routines, feeding Ethan, putting him to sleep, running his business remotely when he could, and surviving the long nights. But hearing Isabella speak, so full of energy and commitment, stirred something in him he hadn't felt in a long time. At one point, Ethan fussed and reached upward, small hands grasping the air toward Isabella. She hesitated only a second before unbuckling him from the stroller. Ryan should have protested. He didn't let just anyone hold his son, but he couldn't, not with her. Ethan settled against her chest like it was the most natural place in the world, his head tucking beneath her chin. Ryan's breath caught. The sight was almost unbearable. He turned his face away toward the pond, where ducks drifted lazily across the water, but his eyes stung. Emily never got this. She never got to hold him alive. Isabella noticed his silence. "Hey," she said softly, rocking Ethan in small motions. "Are you okay?" Ryan nodded quickly. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind." They talked for nearly an hour, conversations flowing more easily as time passed. She told him about her childhood in a small Midwestern town, about how her adoptive parents had been supportive but strict. She admitted she had always felt a little different, though she couldn't explain why. "Like there was some missing piece," she said with a faint laugh. "Guess everyone feels that way sometimes." Ryan's chest tightened at her words. Missing piece. It echoed in his skull like a bell. He wondered if he should tell her about Emily, about the resemblance, about the shiver of something deeper he couldn't name. But fear silenced him. What would she think? That he was crazy? That he was using his grief as a weapon? Instead, he kept the conversation safe. He talked a little about his business, about juggling fatherhood with long hours. He told her only briefly that Emily had died giving birth, leaving him to figure things out on his own. Isabella didn't press, didn't pry. She simply nodded and said, "That must be unbelievably hard. But you're doing it." He looks happy. "That says a lot about you." The compliment struck Ryan harder than he expected. For so long, he had felt like he was failing Ethan, stumbling through each day half prepared and half broken. To hear someone say he was doing well, it almost made him believe it. As the sun began to dip lower, painting the park in gold, Isabella finally returned Ethan to his stroller. The baby clung to her shirt for a moment, whining softly before letting go. She brushed a kiss to his temple without even thinking, then stepped back. "I should finish my run, but maybe we'll see each other here again?" Ryan wanted desperately to ask for her number, to anchor her into his life somehow, so she wouldn't just vanish again, like at the airport. But fear and confusion held him back. He nodded instead. "Yeah, maybe." She smiled, gave a little wave, and jogged off toward the tree-lined path. Ryan stood there watching until she disappeared among the runners and families. His heart pounded in a confusing mix of longing and dread. On the walk home, Ethan babbled from his stroller, waving his hands excitedly as though still thinking of Isabella. Ryan barely noticed the familiar streets around him. His mind spun with questions. Why does she look so much like Emily? Why does Ethan react to her like that? Is this fate or just some cruel trick of resemblance? And why do I feel something pulling me toward her, something I haven't felt since Emily died? That night, after tucking Ethan into bed, Ryan poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat in his dimly lit living room. The house was quiet, but inside his head it was chaos. He opened his laptop again, typing Isabella Carter Chicago Child Development into the search bar. This time, a conference website popped up, one that listed participants of the Boston event. He scrolled until his eyes landed on her name, her photo, her professional title. Isabella Carter, 30, Coordinator of Early Learning Initiatives. He leaned back, staring at the screen. She was real, accomplished, grounded. Nothing about her suggested the ghostly connection he felt, but he couldn't ignore it. On the shelf beside him sat a framed picture of Emily on their wedding day, her veil floating in the breeze, her eyes crinkled with joy. Ryan stared at it for a long time, then at Isabella's headshot on his screen. Two faces, nearly the same. One gone forever, the other sitting just blocks away in the same city. He closed the laptop slowly, whispering to himself, "What are you trying to tell me, Em?" And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning of an unraveling truth. The following days unfolded like a blur, but Ryan could not shake Isabella from his mind. Every morning he would wake before Ethan, stare at the ceiling in the pale light of dawn, and replay the scene at the park, the way Ethan had reached for her, the way she had held him with such natural ease, and the uncanny resemblance that gnawed at him more with each passing hour. He tried to bury himself in work, logging into endless video conferences from his home office. But he caught himself drifting, staring at his reflection in the black monitor screen whenever the calls ended. He wasn't seeing himself, he was seeing Emily, or Isabella. The two faces bled together in his memory until he could no longer separate them. At night, after putting Ethan to bed, Ryan wandered the house like a ghost. Every corner carried Emily's fingerprints. The blanket draped over the couch, the coffee mugs she'd once collected, the piano she never got to teach Ethan to play. He poured himself whiskey he never finished, leaving half-filled glasses on tables as he drifted from room to room. And always, at the edges of his vision, was Isabella. He tried not to search her name again, but 2 nights after the park, he gave in. He typed Isabella Carter, Chicago Early Childhood Education into the search bar. The same profile appeared, conference registries, a LinkedIn page with a crisp headshot, mentions of her work at a network of preschools. He clicked through every detail, absorbing fragments of her life. She was 30, educated, a career woman, adopted as a baby, according to a line in an interview where she spoke about why she dedicated herself to helping children find belonging. Ryan's chest tightened as he read that. Adopted, a missing past, a missing piece. The coincidence gnawed at him. Emily had once confessed, long before Ethan, long before her pregnancy, that she sometimes had dreams of a twin she never knew. She had laughed it off, called it silly, but she had said the feeling never really went away. Ryan hadn't thought about that in years. Now the memory surfaced with alarming clarity. One evening, unable to resist, he pulled down a dusty cardboard box from the top shelf of his closet. Inside were remnants of Emily's life, photographs, letters, scraps of journals she had kept since she was a teenager. He sifted through them carefully, his hands trembling. A photo slipped out, yellowed at the edges. It showed Emily at about 5 years old, standing in her grandmother's backyard, wearing a summer dress with a crooked bow. But what froze Ryan's breath was not Emily. It was the other child beside her, identical in face, wearing the same dress, holding her hand. 2 girls. Ryan's knees went weak. He sat heavily on the floor, staring at the picture, his heart pounding so loud he swore it echoed in the room. He flipped it over. On the back, in faded blue ink, someone had scrawled, "My girls, 1999, my girls." Plural. He pressed a trembling hand over his mouth. Emily had never mentioned this photo. Her mother had never spoken of it. Why? Panic and revelation crashed together inside him. Isabella wasn't just a resemblance. She wasn't just coincidence. She was blood, family. He wanted to deny it, to chalk it up to some cousin or friend. But the evidence stared him in the face. The identical features. Emily's old confession about feeling like she had a twin. Isabella's adoption story. The missing puzzle pieces were aligning. Ryan's pulse thundered as he rose and stumbled downstairs, clutching the photo in his hand. He poured another whiskey, but his hands shook too much to bring the glass to his lips. Instead, he sank into the couch, the photo lying flat on the coffee table in front of him. For hours he sat there, mind spinning, until Ethan's cries broke through the storm. He hurried upstairs, scooped his son into his arms and held him close. Ethan's tiny fingers clutched at his shirt, his warm body pressing into Ryan's chest. Ryan whispered into his son's hair, his voice trembling, "She's your aunt. She has to be. She's your mum's sister." The words felt insane to say aloud, but also inevitable. The next day, Ryan drove across town to visit Emily's mother. He hadn't gone in months. The house was small, cluttered, filled with memories of a woman who had lost too much already. She welcomed him stiffly, surprised to see him, and ushered him into the kitchen. Over tea, he danced around the subject before finally producing the photograph. He slid it across the table. "Who is this?" he asked quietly. Her eyes flicked down, and for the briefest moment, something like fear flashed across her face. She forced a smile. "A cousin, maybe a neighbor's child. I don't remember." Ryan leaned forward, his voice firmer now. "Don't lie to me. I know what I'm looking at." The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, she exhaled shakily and looked away. There were circumstances. Things you don't understand. Emily didn't know. She was never told. Ryan's stomach dropped. She had a sister, didn't she? Her eyes filled with tears, but she gave no answer. That was answer enough. When Ryan left the house, the world felt tilted. The sky seemed too bright, the streets too loud. He drove without direction for nearly an hour before finally parking at a quiet overlook of Lake Michigan. He sat in the car, staring at the endless water, the photograph still clutched in his hand. The truth was undeniable now. Isabella wasn't just a stranger who looked like Emily. She was Emily's twin, Ethan's aunt, and she didn't know. Back at home, Ryan put Ethan to bed and sat once more at his desk. He stared at his phone, Isabella's profile glowing faintly on the screen. His thumb hovered over the button to message her. He typed a few words. "We need to talk. I found something you should see." Then he deleted them, fear tangled in his chest. How could he tell her this? What if she thought he was insane? What if she rejected the truth entirely? But deeper than fear was something else, responsibility. Ethan deserved to know his family. Isabella deserved to know her sister existed, and that she had lost her too soon. As midnight ticked closer, Ryan whispered into the silence of the house, "Emily, if you can hear me, tell me what to do. Because I don't know if I can do this alone." The only answer was the soft hum of the baby monitor and the sound of his son breathing steadily upstairs. Ryan sat there in the half-dark, knowing that his life and Isabella's was about to change forever. The morning after Ryan discovered the photograph, sleep clung to him like a heavy fog. He had barely closed his eyes all night, his mind pacing in circles around the truth he could no longer deny. He dragged himself out of bed at dawn, his head throbbing, his body weak. But the photograph of Emily and her twin burned like fire in his pocket. Ethan babbled softly in his crib when Ryan entered the nursery, his chubby hands reaching for his father. Ryan lifted him gently, pressing a kiss to his son's head. "You don't even know, buddy," he whispered, rocking him slowly. "You've got family out there. You've got an aunt. You deserve to know her." After feeding Ethan and setting him down with toys, Ryan paced the living room with the photograph in his hand. He knew he couldn't bury the truth. Emily's mother had all but confirmed it with her silence, and Isabella's adoption story aligned with the missing puzzle piece. Still, he felt like a trespasser into someone else's secret, like he was about to detonate a bomb inside Isabella's life. By mid-morning, Ryan made a decision. He would tell her, but when? How? He imagined approaching her in the park again, holding out the photograph like evidence in a trial. He imagined her shock, her disbelief, the possibility that she would accuse him of fabricating everything. The risk terrified him, yet keeping silent terrified him even more. That afternoon, Ryan packed Ethan into his stroller and returned to the park. The autumn air was crisp, the trees lining the paths ablaze with orange and gold. Children ran through piles of leaves, their laughter echoing across the open fields. Ryan found a bench near the pond and waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Ethan dozed in his stroller, lulled by the sound of ducks splashing in the water. Ryan scanned every runner, every walker, every face. No Isabella. He nearly gave up, but just as the sun began to dip, he saw her. Jogging up the path, cheeks flushed, ponytail swinging. She slowed when she noticed him, surprise flickering across her face before settling into a cautious smile. "Ryan," she said, pulling out her earbuds. "Didn't expect to see you here again." Ryan forced a smile, though his palms were damp with sweat. "Yeah, Ethan likes the park." As if on cue, Ethan stirred and sat up, eyes lighting when he saw her. He stretched his arms toward Isabella with an excited squeal. Her face softened instantly. "Hey, little man!" She crouched down, scooping him into her arms without hesitation. Ethan giggled, pressing his small hands against her cheeks as though she belonged to him. Ryan's chest tightened. The photograph burned against his pocket, like it wanted to leap into her hands. But he held back, for now. They walked slowly around the pond, Ethan perched happily on Isabella's hip. She talked about her day, how the preschool where she worked was preparing for a fall festival, how the kids had carved pumpkins with more enthusiasm than skill. Ryan listened, though half his mind was on the truth he was hiding. Every word she spoke seemed to confirm it. She wasn't just someone who resembled Emily. She carried the same warmth, the same humor, the same subtle tilt of the head when she laughed. When they finally sat on a bench beneath a maple tree, Ryan knew he couldn't hold it in any longer. His hands trembled as he pulled the photograph from his jacket pocket. He set it gently on the bench between them. Isabella glanced down, curiosity flickering in her eyes. She picked it up, studying it closely. "That's Emily?" she asked, her brow furrowing. Ryan swallowed hard. "Yes, that's Emily, and the other girl..." His voice cracked. "That's you!" The color drained from Isabella's face. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head. "No, that can't be. That's not me." "I don't remember this." Ryan leaned forward, his voice urgent but gentle. "Of course you don't. You were adopted. They never told you. But look at it, Isabella. Look at her face. Look at your own. It's not coincidence." Her hands trembled as she held the photograph closer, as though the truth might reveal itself in the ink and paper. She stared at the identical girls in matching dresses, the way their hands clutched each other's. Her breathing quickened. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. "My parents, they said they adopted me because my birth mother couldn't care for me. They never mentioned a sister." Ryan's eyes softened. "Emily never knew either. She went to her grave not knowing. But your birth mother knew. She hid it. I don't know why. Maybe shame, maybe fear, maybe desperation. But this," he gestured to the photograph, "this is proof. You're her twin. You're Ethan's aunt." Isabella sat frozen, her eyes filling with tears. She tried to blink away. She clutched Ethan closer, as though grounding herself in his warmth. The baby babbled happily, oblivious to the storm shaking the adult's world apart. For a long time, silence hung between them, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant shouts of children playing. Finally, Isabella looked at Ryan, her voice raw. "Do you have any idea what you're saying? You're telling me my whole life, everything I thought I knew was a lie." Ryan's own eyes stung. "I know, and I'm sorry, but you deserve the truth. Emily deserved it too, and Ethan deserves to know the woman who is his family." She stood abruptly, pacing a few steps away, the photograph clenched in her fist. "This is too much. I don't even know you. And now you're telling me I had a sister and she's gone, and I'm an aunt to your son. How am I supposed to process that?" Ryan rose slowly, his voice steady but pleading. "You don't have to process it all today. You don't even have to believe me right now. But I promise you, I'll show you everything. Emily's journals, her pictures, her life. You'll see yourself in them. And when you're ready, we can do a DNA test. No tricks, no lies. Just the truth." Isabella's chest heaved, her face pale with shock. She turned back to him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear, anger, and something else, longing. "If this is true, if I really had a sister, then someone stole that from me. They stole her from me." Her voice broke and she pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely now. Ethan reached up, touching her cheek as if trying to wipe them away. She let out a sob, clutching him tighter. Ryan stepped closer, his own throat tight. "You didn't lose everything. You still have him. And maybe you still have me too." She looked at him then, really looked at him, as though searching for a reason not to believe. But the photograph in her hand, the child in her arms, and the familiar pull in her heart all told her the same thing. The truth was undeniable. That night, long after Isabella had left the park, Ryan sat alone in his darkened living room, Ethan asleep upstairs. He replayed the moment over and over, the shock in her face, the tears in her eyes, the way she had clutched Ethan as though he was the only anchor left in a storm-tossed sea. Ryan knew the days ahead would not be easy. There would be questions, doubts, maybe even anger. But the path had begun. The truth was out, and nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. The week that followed felt like living inside a storm cloud, quiet on the surface, but heavy with thunder rumbling in the distance. For Ryan, every hour was thick with anticipation. He kept replaying the park encounter in his mind, Isabella clutching Ethan, the tears in her eyes, the photograph trembling in her hand. He knew he had set in motion something that could never be undone. Isabella did not contact him for 3 days. 3 long, punishing days. Ryan tried to respect her silence, but inside he wrestled with fear. Had he pushed her too hard? Had he broken something fragile that might never be mended? At night, after Ethan was asleep, he sat alone with Emily's journals spread across the coffee table, wondering if showing them to Isabella would heal her or shatter her. On the 4th evening, as twilight painted the Chicago skyline in lavender and gray, his phone finally buzzed. A single message from Isabella. "We need to talk. Tonight." Ryan's heart lurched. His fingers hovered over the screen before he typed back, "Of course. Where?" She replied almost instantly, "There's a coffee shop on Belmont, quiet, 8 p.m. The hours between the text and the meeting stretched endlessly. He fed Ethan, bathed him, tucked him into bed with a soft lullaby. As he closed the nursery door, he paused to watch his son's tiny chest rising and falling. "She's your aunt, buddy," he whispered into the dim room. "No matter what happens tonight, I'll make sure you know her." At exactly 8 Ryan pushed open the door to the small cafe. The smell of roasted coffee beans enveloped him, warm and earthy. The place was nearly empty, just a handful of students with laptops and an older couple sharing pie. And there at a corner table sat Isabella. She wasn't in running clothes this time. She wore a simple navy sweater, her hair down, falling around her shoulders. But her eyes gave her away, red-rimmed, tired, the kind of eyes that had cried too much in too short a time. Ryan approached cautiously. "Hi," he said softly. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "Hi." He sat across from her, waiting. The silence stretched. Finally, she slid the photograph across the table. She had kept it. The edges were smudged now, as if she had handled it again and again, searching for answers. "I've stared at this for hours," Isabella said, her voice low, steady. "At first I told myself it was just a trick of resemblance. But the longer I looked, the more I knew." She paused, swallowing hard. "That's me. And that means everything I thought I knew about my life is a lie." Ryan's throat tightened. "I'm sorry you had to find out like this." "I wish I could have done it differently." She shook her head sharply. "No, Ryan, you didn't create this. You just uncovered it. The lie was planted years ago by people who decided for me what I should and shouldn't know." Her voice trembled, but there was fire beneath it. Ryan leaned forward. "Did you talk to your parents?" Her eyes flickered with pain. "I did, and they admitted it. They said they knew. From the beginning. My birth mother didn't want both of us. She kept Emily and gave me away. And my parents agreed never to tell me. They said it was part of the arrangement." She laughed bitterly, though no humor touched her face. "An arrangement. As if I were a piece of furniture, not a child." Ryan felt a stab of anger on her behalf. "You had every right to know." Emily had every right to know. Isabella looked down at the photograph again. "The worst part is, I always felt it. All my life I felt like there was something missing, like a shadow I couldn't see. And now I know why." Her voice cracked. "She was out there, my sister. And no one told me." Tears slid silently down her cheeks. She wiped them away roughly. "And now she's gone. I'll never get to meet her." Ryan's chest ached. He wanted to reach across the table, to hold her hand, to anchor her through the storm. But he forced himself to stay still, to let her speak. "She was your wife," Isabella continued, her eyes meeting his. "You knew her better than anyone. Tell me about her, please. I need to know who she was. Not the ghost of a sister I never met. The real woman." Ryan hesitated, his throat thick with grief. But he nodded. "Emily was sunshine. She was stubborn, yes, but she laughed easily. She loved to dance when she thought no one was watching. She had this way of making everything feel lighter, even when the world was heavy. And she wanted Ethan more than anything." His voice broke. He pressed his hand over his mouth, forcing back tears. "She never got to hold him." Isabella listened intently, her own tears falling freely now. She whispered, "That sounds like me. It sounds like things I would do. It feels like I already know her, even though I don't." Ryan reached slowly across the table. This time she didn't pull away. Their hands met, tentative but steady. For a long time, they sat like that, bound by the weight of the truth and the ache of loss. Finally, Isabella spoke again, her voice steadier. "We need to know for sure. Not just photographs, not just feelings. I want a DNA test. If I'm her sister, I want it proven. I can't live in this limbo." Ryan nodded without hesitation. "I'll arrange it. Whatever you need." They sat in silence for several minutes, the hum of the cafe wrapping around them. When Isabella finally pulled her hand back, she looked exhausted, but there was a glimmer of resolve in her eyes. "I don't know what this means for us, Ryan," she admitted. "But I know one thing. I need to meet Ethan again. Not just as the baby I calmed on a flight, but as my nephew. As family." Ryan's heart swelled. He gave a small smile, the first genuine one in days. "He already knows you. You saw the way he looks at you. He feels it too." For the first time that evening, Isabella smiled through her tears. "Maybe he does." They left the cafe together, walking into the cool Chicago night. The streets shimmered with neon lights, the air filled with the distant sound of traffic. At the curb, Isabella paused, her breath visible in the chill. "I'll see you soon," she said quietly. Ryan nodded. "Soon." As she disappeared into the night, Ryan stood frozen beneath the streetlight, the photograph still burning in his pocket. The path ahead was uncertain, tangled with grief and hope alike. But for the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of something he thought he had lost forever. Possibility. The truth was no longer a secret. The truth was alive, walking the same streets, breathing the same air, and now there was no turning back. The DNA results arrived on a grey Wednesday afternoon, in a plain envelope that looked far too ordinary for something that carried the weight of 2 entire lives. Isabella had asked that the clinic send the results directly to her, but when she saw Ryan's number flashing on her phone that morning, she knew she couldn't do this alone. By evening, they were together in the small park where it had all begun. The playground was nearly empty. Only the squeak of a lone swing broke the silence. Ryan pushed Ethan gently in his stroller, his heart pounding. Isabella stood a few steps away, the envelope clutched in her trembling hands. For several long minutes, neither spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Isabella tore the seal with a shaky motion. The papers rustled. Her eyes scanned the page. And then she whispered, her voice breaking on the words, 99.9% match. Identical twins. The paper slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the ground like a feather. She sank onto the nearest bench, burying her face in her hands. Ryan bent quickly, retrieving the result, though he barely needed to read it. The truth was already written in every detail of her face, every echo of Emily's smile. When Isabella looked up, tears streaked her cheeks, but there was a fierce clarity in her eyes. "All those years," she whispered. "I thought I was alone. I thought I was an afterthought. And all this time I had a sister, a twin." Ryan sat beside her, Ethan stirring softly in his stroller. "Emily didn't know," he said gently. "She lived her life believing she was an only child. But she always had this feeling. She wrote about it once in her journal. She wondered if there was another part of her out there, someone she couldn't name." Isabella stared at him, stunned. "She felt it too?" Ryan nodded. "She did. And now somehow, the two of you found your way back together. Even if it's through me, through Ethan." At the sound of his name, Ethan giggled and reached a hand toward Isabella. She bent forward instinctively, scooping him into her arms. He nestled against her shoulder as though it were the most natural place in the world. For a moment, Isabella couldn't breathe. The weight of the child, his warmth, the way he clutched her sweater, it felt like belonging. She pressed her lips to Ethan's hair, whispering, "I promise, I'll be here for you. I won't disappear the way they did from me." Ryan's throat tightened. Watching them, he felt a mixture of grief, wonder, and something else he couldn't quite name. He knew the world had shifted forever. The days that followed were a blur of new routines. Isabella began visiting often, sometimes in the mornings before work, sometimes late in the evening when Ethan was already asleep and the house was hushed. She brought books, toys, little things she thought a toddler might love. Slowly, she wove herself into their lives thread by thread. Ryan, at first cautious, soon realized Ethan adored her. The boy laughed more when she was around, babbled happily, reached for her with eager arms. For Ryan, every shared moment was both healing and dangerous. Healing because he saw the joy Isabella brought. Dangerous because feelings he had buried deep began to stir again. They cooked together one night, spaghetti with flour and sauce ending up everywhere, Ethan giggling in his high chair. At one point, Isabella leaned across the counter to wipe a streak of flour from Ryan's cheek, and their eyes locked. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words. She pulled back quickly, cheeks flushed. Another evening, after Ethan was asleep, Ryan showed Isabella a box of Emily's belongings he had kept hidden. Photographs, letters, a wedding veil carefully folded. Isabella sifted through them with reverence, sometimes smiling, sometimes breaking into tears. When she found a video on Ryan's laptop, a clip of Emily dancing barefoot in the living room to an old jazz song, she laughed and cried at once. "She moves like me," she whispered. Ryan couldn't take his eyes off her, but not everyone was ready to let them build something new. Renata, Emily's estranged older sister, had been circling like a hawk. She filed motions to reopen the inheritance, using Isabella's existence as a weapon. She spread whispers about Ryan, accusations of manipulation, of betrayal, of trying to replace Emily with her twin. One afternoon, Isabella received a message from Renata. "You don't know the man you're trusting. He lied to Emily. He'll lie to you too. Meet me and I'll show you proof." Shaken, Isabella showed Ryan the message. His jaw clenched, but his voice remained steady. "She's trying to poison you against me. Don't let her. But what if she's right?" Isabella whispered. "What if I don't know you as well as I think?" The words pierced Ryan like a blade. He stepped back, nodding slowly. "If you want to hear her out, I won't stop you. Just promise me you'll look at the whole picture, not just the shadows she points at." Isabella agreed, though the doubt gnawed at her. The meeting with Renata was colder than Chicago winter. They sat in a dim cafe, Renata sliding an envelope of documents across the table. "Bank records, legal papers, photos from years ago. Look closely," Renata said, her voice slick with bitterness. "Ryan took control of everything after Emily died. Do you think that's love? Or strategy?" Isabella sifted through the papers, heart pounding. She couldn't decipher all the numbers and signatures, but the implication was clear. She left the cafe more conflicted than ever. That night, sitting across from Ryan at his dining table, she confronted him. "Did you manipulate things after Emily died? Did you take what wasn't yours?" Ryan's face went pale. He rose without a word, went to his office, and returned with a thick folder. He dropped it onto the table. "These are the legal documents. Everything I did was for Ethan. I never touched a cent for myself. If you don't believe me, take them. Show them to a lawyer. I have nothing to hide." The raw honesty in his eyes made Isabella's own fill with tears. She reached for the folder but didn't open it. Instead, she whispered, "I don't want papers, Ryan. I want the truth." He leaned forward, his voice breaking. "The truth is, I lost Emily, and I've been trying to survive ever since. The truth is, Ethan is my whole world. And the truth is," he stopped, trembling, his eyes locked on hers, "that every time you walk into this house, I feel like I'm getting a piece of her back. And it terrifies me, because I don't know if it's fair to you." Isabella's breath caught. The air between them seemed to thrum with something electric, dangerous, undeniable. One evening, after another tense day, Isabella came by unannounced. She brought ice cream, claiming she was just craving something sweet. They ended up sitting on the couch, Ethan asleep upstairs, the television murmuring in the background. At some point, Isabella set down her spoon, leaned back and whispered, "Ryan, I'm scared." He turned to her gently. "Of what?" "Of how much I want to stay." Her voice cracked. "Of how much I care about Ethan, about you. It feels wrong, like I'm stealing her place. But it also feels inevitable." Ryan reached for her hand, slowly, cautiously. Their fingers intertwined. "You're not stealing anything? You're writing something new. Emily would want you here. I believe that." Tears slipped down Isabella's face, but she didn't let go. For a long while they sat like that, hands entwined, hearts open. The weight of the past pressing in, but the hope of the future shining faintly through. In the weeks that followed, life became a delicate balance. Renata loomed in the background, bitter and relentless. Lawyers exchanged letters. Shadows of suspicion flickered. Yet within Ryan's home, something tender grew. Isabella read bedtime stories to Ethan, her voice soft, melodic. Ryan found himself lingering in doorways, watching them, daring to believe in joy again. One night as snow fell softly outside, Isabella kissed Ethan's forehead goodnight, then turned to find Ryan standing behind her. Their eyes met, and the silence between them shifted. It wasn't grief. It wasn't doubt. It was something raw, alive. She whispered, "What happens to us now?" Ryan stepped closer, his voice barely audible. "We take it one step at a time. Together, if you'll let me." And in that moment, though the world outside still raged with uncertainty, Isabella felt a strange, fragile peace. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just someone's secret. She wasn't just the child who had been given away. She was a sister, an aunt, and perhaps something more. The story of Emily wasn't over. It lived on, in Ethan's laughter, in Ryan's unwavering devotion, and now in Isabella's heartbeat, which beat in rhythm with a family she had only just begun to claim. And though the road ahead promised storms, that night they allowed themselves one small, steady truth: they were no longer alone.